It's my pleasure to be moderating this panel with these distinguished panelists here today. We have Don Weiss, who is the CEO of Marin Clean Energy, Joe Como, who is the director of the Public Utilities Commission Office of Ratepayer Advocates, and Ann Hancock, who directs the Center for Climate Protection and has been an advocate for community choice energy for many years. And you can read more about them in their bios in the program. So as we heard in our last panel with Secretary Schultz and Director Arvizo, local development is driving change. And one of those local initiatives is community choice energy, which is what we'll talk about today. And we're going to talk about those folks who are doing it and who are providing a template for others to do it, as we were so nicely directed to do by Secretary Schultz. So we have a lot to cover here, and I'm going to be conscious of the time. We've all talked together, but if we get stuck, I'll try to urge us to move along so that we can answer lots of questions. So, Joe, maybe you could give us a quick overview on what community choice energy is and what the laws and regulations are that are governing this.
Sure, I'll try to do that very quickly because I think a lot of people here are somewhat familiar with this. So basically, community choice aggregation is a state program where local governments can aggregate the load of their electric users within their geographic area and procure that energy. They can buy it, they can build their own resources or a combination of both, while maintaining the electricity provider in the area to deliver the transmission and distribution resources. So basically, local government can buy electricity and have, in the instance of our area here, have PG&E still maintain the distribution and transmission grid and deliver that energy. And in the simplest form, that's what it is. It allows customers a choice. They are defaulted into the program, but they are given several opportunities to opt out of the program. And it allows the local government to prescribe the mix of generation resources and possibly use some of that income generated locally to fashion new resources and to sort of promote their own energy future. It also is something that is useful to the local entity in order to sort of prescribe and put together programs on energy efficiency that are good for that particular climate zone that the government is located in. It was prescribed in law in 2002. AB 117, Assembly Bill 117, was where the rules were ironed out. At the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, it was argued in terms of the particularities of the rules. And each of the investor-owned utilities in California have tariffs which govern the very particular rules and tariffs that CCAs have to follow. So I think that, in a nutshell, is basically what CCA is.
Great. So Don, you're the head of the first CCA that formed in California. So can you give us a quick overview on why did it happen in Marin? How's it going? And let us know.
Happy to. So I'm glad that Joe mentioned the legislation because that was kind of where it started in Marin County. I was working as a sustainability planner with the County of Marin back in the late 90s, and we conducted a greenhouse gas inventory, and we're looking for ways to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions countywide. And when this bill came along in 2002, we supported it. We thought it sounded like a great idea. After it passed, we did a number of feasibility studies, peer reviews. Local governments like to really study things before moving forward, and as the first one, we had to do quite a bit of study, but we were able to launch our program in 2010, and really the driving reason behind launching the program was we wanted to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and we didn't have choices regarding the renewable content in our power supply. We were kind of given only one option. And so forming a community choice program was a way for us to get more access to renewable energy for all the customers in our community. We started in 2010 with 2 energy products. One that was light green, it was 25% renewable at that time. That was the default option. We also offered customers a 100% renewable option for a small premium of about $5 a month for an average residential customer. After being up and running for a year, we were able to increase our light green product to be 50% renewable, and it's stayed at that rate since that time. So we've been able to exceed our targets on that front. And I think the reasons behind the program being launched in Marin County were local control, choice, renewable energy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and energy efficiency programs. And we've been able to achieve a lot of that. You asked how it's going. It's going pretty well. We've been able to get a lot of local renewable projects built within our service territory. We've also been able to get a lot of large California-based renewable projects built in the Central Valley that are now serving our customers. Just in the last 6 months, we've had 3 large projects come online, a 20-megawatt solar project from Kings County, a 23-megawatt solar generation project in Kern County, and just last month a 99-megawatt wind facility that just came online, also in the Central Valley. In our local region, we're in the process of building a 10.5-megawatt solar facility at a brownfield site in Richmond, and we're in the process of building or incentivizing through our feed-in tariff about 10 other local projects that will be solar. One will be landfill waste to energy. The rest will be solar within our service territory. So we've been able to achieve a lot of our goals ahead of schedule. We've also been able to do a lot on the energy efficiency front, and we've launched a lot of innovative pilots to control load. I really enjoyed hearing the comments by NREL this morning just about the innovation that's currently available. We're seeing a lot of that, and we're partnering with a lot of organizations to control load. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Just to wrap it up, we're now serving 165,000 customers in 17 communities. So we're not just in Marin County, we're also serving customers in Richmond, unincorporated Napa, Benicia, El Cerrito, and San Pablo. And we've been able to see significant greenhouse gas reductions. The last thing I'll say is that we've added a third choice for customers that's called Local Sol. It's 100% local solar. So for customers that want to be able to buy a project or buy energy that's tied to a project from within our service territory, they can choose Local Sol and have a fixed rate for 20 years because we're just passing through the contract cost to customers. So as a local government agency, we've been able to create a lot of choice in our community and achieve and exceed many of the targets we set forward when we were launching. And we have a lot more on the horizon, which I can talk about later.
Thanks, Dawn. What an entrepreneurial local government. That's a great example.
Yeah.
So Ann, you're right next door in Sonoma County, next door to Marin County. So, and I know you've been very active there. Can you tell us about what's going on in Sonoma County and what we see for the future there?
Great. So first of all, I'm with the nonprofit organization that was the Spur in Sonoma County, but I'm not Sonoma Clean Power, which is the entity that now exists. That's the counterpart to Marin Clean Energy. I just like to make that clear. We started with the end in mind, just like in Marin County with Dawn. We set a very bold greenhouse gas reduction target in 2005 and started looking at how can we achieve that target. What are the solutions that are under local control? And community choice rose up above all the other solutions that are under local control for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we very much supported and watched what was going on in Marin. And one difference that we had is because of the $4 million campaign that PG&E ran against community choice, can you imagine putting up the first community choice in California with a $4 million campaign running against you? But Marin did it. And because of that, a bill was passed, SB 790, that all of the rest of California communities benefit from because it prescribed the rules of engagement between the incumbent utility and communities that are trying to stand up a community choice entity. So we got the benefit of that. And also we had the benefit of a water agency that was tasked by the Board of Supervisors, which happened to be also its board, lead forward with community choice. So they invested the money and the staff time to actually take what started in the nonprofit sector and jumped over to the government sector, lead that forth with the cities, so that in 2014, last year on May 1st, we also started serving customers for the first time. And we had a batch of cities that came forward, 5 cities, in 2013, and so they were able to be served in 2014. And then in 2014, the 3 remaining eligible cities in Sonoma County also joined on. And so now Sonoma Clean Power serves 100% of the eligible communities within the Sonoma County boundary. The success has exceeded expectations. So the rates are right now running about 6 to 9% lower than PG&E's. And the greenhouse gas emissions are running about 30% lower than than PG&E's. And just like in Marin County, there are 2 products, Evergreen, which is 100% local renewable, which because we have the geysers, we can offer 100% local green renewable power. And we also have what's known as Clean Start. And one of the really good pieces of news just coming out in the last couple weeks is the town of Windsor did an analysis of how did being part of Sonoma Clean Power stack up with what the expectations were. They had expected to save on their 130 accounts about $1,000 a month with Sonoma Clean Power. Instead, they're saving $8,000 a month, so 8 times what they expected. So it really is a really fantastic new initiative that's happening in Sonoma County. I also wanted to say that the cost, it's very nice to hear our CEO, Jeff Cyphers, talk about this. He said the cost of standing up Sonoma Clean Power was minus $6 million. That's how much our community saved in 2014 with a partial year of service and a partial load of customers. So it really is an amazing, right now, opportunity for local governments. And what we're seeing, in 2014, there were about 12 communities in California that were investigating community choice. And our spreadsheet and our accounts show that there's over 70 communities now in California investigating community choice. So hats off to Marin for blazing the trail. And also Joe has a hand in making the water safe to go into for communities. And it really is a huge opportunity right now for communities to have lower rates, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and community control and voice in a big policy opportunity.
Thank you, Ann. So both of you are, showing how inspiring and exciting how the community choice can be for a community. So Jeff Byron, my fellow Los Altan, asked me to go ahead and moderate this. And so the title of this panel is Community Choice Energy Has Arrived in California. Is Silicon Valley ready? Usually here in Silicon Valley, we like to be first, but that's okay that you all beat us to it. So I'll just give a quick overview of what is going on here in Silicon Valley and defining Silicon Valley as in a pretty broad range. And what we in Los Altos as a city are doing to look at the opportunities. So if we start with Santa Clara County, there's a South Bay CCE that's starting to form, and the cities of Mountain View, Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and the unincorporated area of Santa Clara County is taking the lead on this and moving forward. The other cities in the county, such as Los Altos, and a number of others have indicated that we're interested, but we're not part of the actual planning of that CCE at this point. San Jose, which is kind of the big gorilla here in Santa Clara County, is not part of that effort, and we'll talk a little bit more about size, what's the appropriate size for a CCE, but San Jose is probably going to go off and do something on their own. San Mateo County has formed a steering committee, and the county is taking the lead, and all of the cities within the county are part of an advisory committee that's looking at the option in San Mateo County. Similarly, in Alameda County, the county is taking the lead, and all of the cities within Alameda County are participating and looking at the next steps. In our town of Los Altos, we're looking at all of the different models, and we'll talk a little bit more about the business models. But we have an environmental commission in our town, and a subcommittee of that environmental commission is looking at what's the best approach. Should we look to join the CCE that the county and the 3 cities that I mentioned before are forming? There's also a private business model that's emerging that we'll talk a little bit today. Should we go off and do it on our own, or are there other business models that are occurring? So we're trying to take a pretty measured and careful, studied approach to see what would be best for our community of 30,000 people. So I'd like to ask the panelists here, and maybe Dawn and Ann, you can weigh in on this. So there's these different business models that are forming. What do you think about them? And as far as the JPA model, JPA meaning a joint powers agency, where a number of communities form together to make a business, which is actually the Marin and Sonoma models. What do you think about these different approaches?
Yeah, well, there are really 2 ways that a CCA can form, and under the statute, it has to be a local government agency that adopts an ordinance to launch a program. And so that can happen by a single city or a single county, or if multiple cities and towns want to join together or join with their county, they can do it through a joint powers authority structure. And joint powers authorities, or JPAs, are used across the state for all sorts of functions when small local governments, or sometimes large, want to band together and do something jointly. The JPA structure creates a firewall between the debts and liabilities of the JPA and the debts and liabilities of its members. So it's a nice legally sound approach that seems to work well for local governments to protect against risk. So the JPA approach, of course, is what we've used and what Sonoma Clean Power used because there were multiple cities that wanted to join together. It's a nice idea when you have small towns that don't have the capacity or the staffing to kind of start something off on their own. So that model is proven, and it's worked great, actually. In our experience, it's been great. And then the city model is also great because you can launch a program within the existing staff structure that already exists within the city. We haven't mentioned Lancaster, but the city of Lancaster has launched a program. They just went live in May, and they are a single city community choice program, and they're doing a great job, and they have some efficiencies because they're using existing staff, and so it's a little bit simpler when you go that route. The last thing I'll say, and then I'm sure Ann and Joe may want to comment on this, but the way that our board is structured, our governing board is made up of 1 representative from every city and town that is in our service territory. So we have 17 board members. We have 1 from the little town of Belvedere, all the way to unincorporated Napa and the city of Benicia. And these representatives get together and provide governance for us on a regular basis. As a local government agency, all of our meetings are publicly noticed under the Brown Act. There's a lot of transparency, and there's also a lot of accountability because these elected officials are accountable to their constituents. So I'll leave it at that.
So the community choice offers a community choice. And now what we're finding is another layer of choice in how do you stand up your program. You can, if you are able, join with Marin. That's how some communities have done it. You can form a JPA following the model in Marin and Sonoma. You can do what Lancaster has done. And we have a new player on the scene called California Clean Power, which is another aspect of a public-private partnership. And whether this model works or not has yet to be tested. It's brand new. It's been subject to a lot of scrutiny and criticism. And in fact, Dawn and I have had long conversations about whether this is a good model or not. So the proof of the pudding will be in the eating of the California Clean Power model. I am hopeful that we will find new models like this. I think listening to Director Arvizu this morning, we talked about how can you mobilize capital? How can you innovate? How can we bring new innovations to the market faster? That is one of the things out of which California Clean Power was born. Do they have a good model? There's been a lot of criticism. we don't know if they do or not. And that's actually where the discussion is right now, is about what the benefits and what the risks are of the model. My personal opinion is that I hope that we do try it. And before that, I hope that some of the glitches are worked out of it. I think that many of them already have been. And to me, it's a very exciting opportunity as somebody who has devoted her life to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and, creating a positive future for our children and all life. I see this as a way for communities to get from 0 to 60 a lot faster so that they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they can have money to help them build capacity, then they can take the time to consider even more various options such as joint powers authority. So that's my personal opinion, is that it's an exciting experiment that I hope some communities will engage in so that we can find out how it works and continue to evolve the model.
Can you give us a couple sentences about what that model is?
The model is, it is, it's based in Sonoma County, and a number of people who had worked for Sonoma Clean Power and worked for various, for PG&E, have formed together to be able to offer a soup to nuts quick start for communities so that they can, communities can basically hire this firm to provide financing, to provide help with ordinances and procurement. As I said, a full soup to nuts offering. And then the community can decide what the rates are for customers, what the greenhouse gas emission reductions are, what the term of the contract is, what the community benefit is. These are some of the options that a community has for in the negotiations with California Clean Power. Is that the kind of thing you wanted to hear, Jen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. So for those people who maybe have not heard of this model before.
Can I make
Joe,
one
yes,
comment?
Please.
In terms of something that Dawn said, which I think is really important, is that the accountability aspect to community choice aggregation is so important to this. I was involved in making the rules back 2002, 2003, and one of the most important aspects, and I was representing the city of San Francisco at the time, which is still in the track to becoming a CCA itself, is that local officials are accountable to the local constituents. Unlike the investor-owned utility model, where you have state-level control, it's basically steering a very big ship. In the community choice aggregation model, local people decide locally what it is in their mix of resources that they want to see. When we're moving forward, we're talking about microgrids, we're talking about a plug-and-play society in terms of energy production and energy use. We're talking about people actually making choices about storage, demand resources, and whatever they want to put into their grid. It's a local level environment that they're working in. So pushing this to the local level makes a whole lot of sense in terms of energy future for the entire state. So I think CCA is very exciting because it is one solution to get us to that future state.
So let's talk about that local community and actually the residents, the ones who are going to get the benefits of CCAs, and the rates that they pay. So you've both talked about how the rates are lower under a CCA. So I'd like to talk a little bit about rates, rate design. How do you compare your rates? If you say, well, our rates are 6 to 9% lower than PG&E, how do you make that comparison? Are you using the same kind of structure as PG&E? I know this is a very complicated question, but let's talk about that a little bit and what the benefits are to the residents of these communities. And maybe, Dawn, you can start on that.
Sure, happy to. I think I'd want to start by saying that rates can be lower, but rates are not necessarily always going to be lower through a community choice program. It's not a given. And I think that in the last couple of years, we've seen an extremely low point in the market for buying energy. And so our newer folks to the market have been able to take advantage of those low prices. And so I think it's important for folks that haven't been in this for a very long time to keep that in mind, that things will change. And we need to be careful when we're communicating communicating with our community that we aren't always going to be, we aren't promising lower rates forever. I think on the flip side, there are a lot of advantages that we have as a local government agency that are likely to allow us to maintain low rates. And if you look at municipal utilities around California, they do tend to have rates that are about 25% lower than their private counterparts, the private IOUs. So I think it's likely that we'll be able to maintain lower rates, but it's not a sure thing. And when we communicate with customers, we need to focus on stability, affordability, competitive rates, rather than explicitly lower rates. The benefits that we have, I'll run through really quickly. We don't pay shareholder profits. So revenue that comes into the agency goes back into the community for local programs and lower rates. Another factor is we entered the market as a competitor. The monopoly providers across the state haven't had a need to compete and may not have used a competitive thought process when they were doing procurement and making decisions about how they wanted to grow their company. So I think that certainly has benefited us. We've been very careful and very conservative in how we spend funds. We're very nimble. We have a pretty small, efficient staff, and we're able to move quickly to contract, and that has helped us enter into some competitive local in-state renewable contracts. Also, as local governments, we have the ability to borrow money at a lower rate. We have bonding authority. And I think it might be worth mentioning that the California Clean Power model and other vendors California Clean Power isn't the only vendor offering this model. There's one other company called Good Energy from Illinois that's also offering a similar model. This is a private company where they would control the revenue stream of the local government CCA program. And so that bonding authority benefit isn't really there. And many of these other benefits aren't really there because we're talking about a private company. So it's worth mentioning that, but certainly local governments are able to borrow money at a lower rate, and that's a benefit. And the last thing is long-term procurement has been important to us, and that allows us to lock in rate stability. And that's something that's benefited us in maintaining lower rates, and that's one thing that I think will help us maintain lower rates into the future. Particularly right now when prices are low, this is a great time to lock in power for 20 years, 25 years, and that's what we do when we're buying renewable energy.
Thank you. Joe, do you want to comment?
That's a very good summary of the business side of it. I would add to that what we're seeing in the market today is that the portfolios for the investor-owned utilities are more expensive than one-off or two-off contracts. That I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean basically when a CCA forms and they procure energy, they're putting together a much smaller portfolio of current priced generation. And we're in a situation in California right now which is opportunistic for CCAs to form, in that the portfolios of the IOUs, which is the price you're paying for the generation contracts that they signed over the last 10 years and after the energy crisis back about 14 years ago, are more expensive. And those contracts are coming off slowly, but we do see those portfolio prices being more expensive. So, and as a result of the energy crisis, there's been a tendency to overbuild on generation resources in California. We've had a tendency, and this is my opinion, as Director of Office of Ratepayer Advocates, not the Commission, is to build more fossil fuel resources at the same time building up our renewable resources. You can't have both. The idea is that renewables displace fossil fuels, but we don't want the lights to go out. So we're sort of like had a tendency to build in both directions, which has provided an opportunity, because when you have overgenerations, that means that prices are lower for those that get into the market now. And so it's a very good time for CCAs to form.
So Joe, speaking about overgeneration, Ann mentioned initially that there's about 70 communities looking at CCAs. What if all those 70 communities go ahead and form CCAs and contract for their own power? What happens to all that power that the IOUs have contracted for? So now they're way over procured. What's that going to do? Is that going to be a problem, or should we not worry about that?
Well, I mean, I don't see it as a problem, because when you look at it sort of step by step, there's only so much generation out there, so you're competing for the same generation resources. What happens procedurally is that when a CCA forms and comes into the business, they have to basically assume some of the over-market costs for those contracts that the utility procured in the past for the customers. So, example, I'm just using PG&E because they're the local investor-owned utility. If they purchased electricity for, let's say, City of San Francisco, and what would happen is that the City of San Francisco, as part of the rates, would have to pay possibly a small cost responsibility surcharge for those contracts. But as time goes on, those contracts come off their portfolio. And so then eventually the CCA is not responsible for any of that because they've procured their own energy, and the investor-owned utility is not planned to procure energy for that area anymore. So as time goes on, more CCAs can form, but just to step back for a second, the IOUs are actually, they're wires companies. They're not primarily generation companies. Generation is a pass-through cost for the investor-owned utilities. That's with regard to the generation they purchase. They also have some generation resources, but most of that's a pass-through cost. Where they make their money really is on the transmission and distribution and on the services they provide. Those services will still continue to be provided. In fact, about 2/3 of your residential bill from an investor-owned utility is just for those kind of services. So it's not really a competitive disadvantage. It's actually a partnership. I mean, restructuring, which actually failed in California for reasons other than that it was a good idea, the idea was that the wires, that PG&E would become a distribution company only, that they would own the wires, and that competitive members, generation would come into the market and provide the resources. So that model did not work, but not for the reasons that it wasn't a workable idea. There were just some structural problems with that.
If I may add, I think that this harkens to the theme of disruptive, that's what community choice promises to be in California, is a disruptive policy that, if embraced, it's going to change the complexion of utilities in California.
So you all have been talking about the great benefits, local control, lower prices, possibly accountability to the community. But let's talk a little bit about the risks as well, because local governments have to be conservative. They have to protect their general funds. So what are the risks, and how are those kinds of risks mitigated if a community decides to pursue community choice? Whoever wants to take it first.
Do you want to start? No, you go ahead.
Okay. Dawn, you're on.
Okay. Great. I mean, I think that the risks are in many sectors. I think that the biggest risk probably is really doing a good job of procurement, because that's really what we're all about, is buying generation and supplying it to customers. And so making sure that if you're a local government agency that's new to the energy realm, as many are, finding really strong technical support to help you understand how to make the right policy decisions, giving you the tools and the information to make the right policy decisions. I think that when local governments are considering community choice, there's a steep learning curve, but it's really worth going down that learning curve in order to be equipped to make good decisions and address risks as they come up. It's important to make sure that you're calculating your load correctly and buying the right amount of generation for your load. You need to make sure that you have your collateral needs met so that you can procure long-term in the market, and that's a risk that needs to be addressed. And ensuring that you have strong legal support to ensure that you're complying with regulatory requirements, compliance obligations, of which there are quite a few. So those are probably the highest level risks, but the good news is that they're very easy to address if you have knowledgeable people on your team and you're really using the best practices that exist in the market in general for private and public companies to address those types of financial and procurement risks.
Do you want to add to that? Yeah.
I do. I think that there are some other kinds of risks. One is what we saw last year with AB 2145, and legislatively there can be bills, legislation that pass that can threaten the whole of community choice. And we can see this in the regulation level too. So this is why it's important to have more community choices, that entities that band together and can, like we did with last year with 2145, band together and be sure to oppose things that would take away this option for communities. I think another risk is if a community does a bad job, and I think this is where part of the worry is with California Clean Power. If it fails, then it can give a black eye to community choice as a program, and this will jeopardize, increase the odds that we'll get regulation and legislation that will hurt or curtail community choice. So that's another reason to really pay attention to doing it the right way. There is a fallback plan for communities, and we hope that this never is used, in that the incumbent utility is required, I believe, by regulation, if a community choice does fail for some reason, that the incumbent utility is required to take back the entity. So, but we would hope that that would never, ever happen, but it is available if, for some reason, the community choice fails.
Yeah, and I'd like to tag on to that, because I think that's an outcome that would have its own very negative repercussions on the CCA movement. And one of the things that Sonoma Clean Power and MCE have been talking about pushing for is, we, as a local government agency, we think that it makes more sense for us to be the provider of last resort rather than having a private company from outside the community be the provider of last resort. So I think that that particular regulation is one that needs to be revisited in a different way.
So I'd like to
just add just one point to that, is that being someone that came out of the energy crisis and seeing the investor-owned utility that enter bankruptcy, I would say that the real risk here is no different than the risk to having an investor-owned utility deliver the energy and provide the energy. It really is just a matter of the way you look at it. From the customer's standpoint, I haven't seen where the customer, and it's my job to represent the customers on both sides, the CCA and the bundled customers, is that the risk is really very, very minimal, almost non-existent. There is adequacy of energy. There is, to the customer's perspective, a guarantee that whatever the most stringent rules for providing energy, it'll be provided. The same quality, the same resource mix will be provided to that customer. So it's not, from the customer standpoint, I really don't see a risk.
So we talked a little bit about private companies versus government agencies and the transparency, but the public JPAs are also using private companies. So I think when Marin started, you contracted with Shell for your power procurement. I think Sonoma Clean Power right now is contracted with Constellation. You're using private companies for your back office work. Noble Energy is doing some back office. So can you talk a little bit about transparency in that respect? Are they opening up the books to the community so that all of their transactions are there, or are they also a black box within the JPA structure?
Yeah, I would say there's a very big difference between this California Clean Power model and the role that our vendors play. And the main difference is that as a local government agency, we control who provides services to us. We do that frequently through an open bidding process, an RFP process. We control the scope of work. We control the cash flow to that agency. We know how much they're getting paid. We know what they're getting paid for. We can decide if we agree with the amount that they're getting paid. Because we control all operations and cash flows. I think also I'd want to tag on that to say we're contracted with just one entity kind of oversimplifies. We actually we've had about 30 different power suppliers in our portfolio, and But we do work with quite a few providing a lot of services to us, and that's been really valuable. I think we've been fortunate to have a very strong technical team through consultants that we've hired and also through agencies and service providers that we've hired. But they all know that they have to do a good job, perform well, provide excellent work products and good pricing in order to remain in the role that they play with us. They don't have a chokehold on all the work, and I think that's important. I think that the local government needs to have that level of transparency and accountability when they're deciding who to hire for which role, so that the public knows who's doing what, where the dollars are flowing, and what we're getting for the dollars we're paying.
Point, counterpoint. Okay. Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit now about governance, and if there's any lessons learned on governance. How do you balance the larger cities versus smaller cities? What if one city wants to do, they really want a strong energy efficiency program, and another city isn't really interested in that? How do you balance those kinds of things, and what can we learn from the experience that's happened so far? Anne, do you want to start on that?
So far with Sonoma Clean Power, from the outside observer, it seems like the board functions very, very well. Our board, which is comprised of local electeds from each of the participating cities as well as the county. And there's been a lot of alignment. They have a very good executive officer, Jeff Cyphers, who works very well with the board. I think that the board is very satisfied with him. So the potential issues that certainly were all raised when cities were considering whether or not to be part of Sonoma Clean Power, what if this, what if that, all those kind of hypothetical issues have really not come to pass, where there's a very high functioning entity right now. So it's very satisfying to see what many were afraid of has not come and played out.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear Anne say that, because I don't know a lot about the board politics at Sonoma Clean Power. We've seen the same thing. We've seen a very functional board. We've never once had a split vote in 5 years or 7 years, and that's pretty unusual. I think that part of it is because we're not talking about filling potholes versus, money for schools versus this or that, but we're talking about kind of a commonly shared goal, which is, hey, we want to get more renewables onto the grid. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We want to have competitive rates. And it's pretty easy for the board to feel aligned about that. I think that our smaller communities are still at the table, just like our big communities, and they all give their opinions and tend to make decisions jointly based on all the information that people throw out. So there's never been a sense that the smaller communities are getting the short end of the stick. They weigh in as much as they want, and they can influence the decision making through their comments, just like the larger communities do. And we just haven't seen a difference of opinion tied to city allegiances. And it might be because of kind of the democratic nature of decision making and the accountability that our elected officials have to their constituents. We just haven't seen it be an issue.
I can only comment on the part of this that has to do with, excuse me, the customer representation. There always is a natural mistrust of government, which I can identify with. I think that it's always very important, and we saw that in Sonoma County, that they identify that up front during CCA formation, that they allow for a procedure for customers to have a direct input into the decision making that goes into the CCA formation, into running the CCA, and I think I think there's a lot of useful allegiance you can have with the public if you make sure that is included in whatever program you put together.
So do you think there's an ideal size for a CCA? The bill that you mentioned last year that was threatening, AB 2145, was going to limit where a CCA could form or who could join it. But I think the way it is now, it's open. Say if all the cities in LA County wanted to join the Marin Clean Energy, they could. So, but maybe that's not a good thing. So can you talk a little bit about size, what you think is the best size and why? How big should you grow?
No? Okay. I think it's unknown. And that's kind of exciting. I think that maybe some of the folks in the room here will help us all figure that out. When we started, we were serving 8,000 customers. So our first 6 months or so, we were at a small size, and so that we could work out the bugs and then slowly ramp up. I think there are some economies of scale that are needed to make sure you have the staff capacity to go out and do your procurement and manage the customer interface. But I think it's probably feasible for a community as small as 20,000 customers to have a program. I think that having a program as big as 200,000 customers is probably feasible. And I think that where we approach this issue as an agency is our goal, our mission is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and if we stay just in one community, we won't be as effective as if we open this option up to other communities. On the flip side, having a strong connection to the local governments that we serve and the communities that we serve is really important. So for that reason, our expansion has been incremental and close to our existing territory, so we can go out and do outreach. We do 100 events before we enroll in a new community. We're in that community doing farmers markets and chambers of commerce meetings and houses of worship and schools and you name it, we're showing up and talking to people. So doing that at a really large scale isn't really feasible. So I think this question can really be defined by the community. I don't see any huge constraints on size, though, but maybe you all do.
I agree that it's unknown, and I think that that's why it's exciting about the dynamism right now in the community choice field, and actually the emergence of models that we may find that communities of 6,000 can sign up with California Clean Power, be up and running within the year, and it works. Or they can join with Marin or maybe other programs. Maybe eventually Sonoma Clean Power will open its opportunities for other communities nearby. Maybe there will be new players that come into the market and start offering services that enable communities that are very small even to join in. Or maybe even other players that will come in and deal with cities the size of San Jose. So I think it's a very important time to be trying out new models in the community choice field to find out what works, what can get us from 0 to 60 very fast with all the things that we want to see: transparency, local control, local voice. So, I think the experimentation and the dynamism right now is really a very exciting thing.
Great. So I want to go back a little bit on procurement. One of the things I've seen kind of in the chatter in the market is the talk about premium renewables and whether renewables are bundled, where the renewable attribute goes along with the energy versus buying the energy in one market and buying the renewable energy credit in another market, which would then, I guess, make it not premium. What do you think about that? Does that really matter, or is that, how important is that to achieving the goals that a CCA program might have?
Well, I think that when you're buying renewable energy, you need to verify that renewable energy was produced and placed on the grid. And 1 megawatt of renewable energy going onto the grid is going to benefit the environment and help reduce greenhouse gas emissions no matter where it goes onto the grid. So that's not really a question. I think what is a question is, what are the other attributes that we want to address when we're getting more renewables onto the grid? And I think the way that you're describing these so-called premium renewables, the question seems to be more about economics. Are we wanting to create local jobs? Are we wanting to make sure that these renewables are produced in California? That's certainly an important goal, but it's a different goal than whether the energy is renewable or not.
So how important is it that it be locally produced for jobs? How important is that to your different communities that are putting these programs together?
It's very important to MCE that we purchase a lot of our supply locally, both in California and within our service territory. And we actually have the majority of our power supply is coming from within California. And eventually, the goal is to have essentially all of our supply coming from within California. We think that over time that will result in more rate stability, but again, it comes down to economics. And I think that it's important for emergent CCAs to have choices with regards to where they're procuring their energy to make sure that they're economically viable at the beginning, and that there's flexibility regarding getting renewables online. When we launched our program in 2010, we didn't own any energy yet. We didn't have any energy. So we had to buy energy that already existed from other places. As soon as we launched, we started investing in new projects getting built, and that's why I rattled off, 3 big projects that just came online in the last 9 months. Well, those have been underway for a long time. It takes about 3 or 4 years to get projects built. Those are California-based, and they are now in-state, because we think creating local jobs is important, and we want to be able to do that while we're getting renewables onto the grid. But I just think it's important for folks to remember that a kilowatt hour of renewable energy going onto the grid and tracked and using the regulatory environment that exists and is very well conducted, by the way, that those kilowatt hours of renewable energy are very well tracked through the Regis system. That's an important system to maintain, and a kilowatt hour of renewable energy created is going to help the environment no matter where it's coming from.
Okay. So I'll ask you one more question, then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. That's why I've been looking at my watch to make sure we're on time here. One of the things that we hear about are some pilot programs that you're able to institute as a CCA. So maybe if you can briefly talk about that and part of, I guess, one of the 3 Ds of disruptive technologies, disruptive programs. What are you able to do with pilot programs?
I can start, unless you all, I don't want to dominate too much here, but yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the programs that we have going, because I'm just really excited about them. Currently, we have a lot of local projects getting built through our feed-in tariff. I think the feed-in tariff is an excellent tool to incentivize local development by using above market prices to get developers or landowners to build projects for you. We're seeing a lot of activity on that front. On the demand side, we are seeing a lot of changes, and this is an exciting time because the CPUC even is now recognizing the importance of integrating demand-side functions. So we have a pilot program going with Schneider Electric to install load control devices in the residential sector that will allow us to shift load from sometimes the day to the other. So we'll be going behind the scenes for customers and turning off pool pumps or refrigeration or other high-use functions in their home, bundling that load shift and bidding it into the California ISO, or the independent system operator. They need that flexibility in the grid as we have more renewables coming online. So this is one tool that we hope to bring to bear to allow for more flexibility in the grid. We're also working on a battery storage pilot in the residential sector that will allow us to control dispatch of batteries once daily through a battery tariff that our board just approved last month. And this will be another way that we can shift load, bid into CAISO this load shift, and allow for more flexibility on the grid and more integration of renewables. We also are working on electric vehicle deployment in our local government city halls and such, and we're looking to do more of that going forward. We have an electric vehicle rate and a couple of pilot programs on the horizon there. And then we also have an energy efficiency program that has launched an on-bill repayment program or offering to residential and commercial customers so that they can do deeper retrofits in their homes or businesses, or install solar, or now we've added battery storage as an option on the on-bill repayment program. So customers can take things that have a higher upfront cost than they might be willing to absorb, place it on the bill where they're going to be seeing the savings anyway, and pay it off over time on the bill. We have a large multifamily program, multifamily energy efficiency program that's been very successful. That's an area that hadn't had a lot of attention from the investor-owned utilities. And what's on the horizon, the last thing I'll say, is our energy efficiency proposal for the 2016 10-year cycle at the Commission is going to include an idea called the SPOC, the single point of contact. And the single point of contact is someone sitting in our local government agency able to answer questions that customers might have about anything related to energy or tangentially related to energy. So we're talking about traditional energy efficiency, we're talking about water efficiency, solar hot water, solar PV, electric vehicles, battery storage, health and safety. We want to be able to help customers with all of those things. Right now, in the energy efficiency world, customers are very confused. They got a lot of different offerings thrown at them from different places. We want to be able to kind of hold their hand through the process, check back in with them every year or two, ask them, how did that remodel go? Are you ready for the next thing? And maintain that relationship with the customer as a local government. So we're excited about the opportunities to integrate technology through efficiency and have more impacts on our greenhouse gas emissions that way.
Great. Sounds like you're really busy, so thanks for coming down here today. Do we have any questions? Right here.
My first question is...
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Rod Sinks. I'm the mayor of Cupertino, and we're looking forward to having all the cities participate in a JPA in the South Bay. We're just looking to go quickly, but my questions are these. Where do we go to find really qualified employees to staff our CCA? We know that there's real technical expertise, marketing outreach needed. We need to be thinking about starting to hire those employees in the next several months. So I'd welcome any suggestions you have on where we go to best do that. This is not something government in our area has normally done. Second question relates to a Los Angeles Times article of June 14th, comparing investor-owned utility rates with city utility rates in Southern California, taking the averages. And Joe, to your comments, I noticed that at 500 kilowatt hours, the number for the public utilities is $76 versus $102 for investor-owned utilities. And what's odd to me is that number diverges. It increases at 2,000 kilowatt hours from 621 from 351. So that number has gone from a 34% difference to a 76% difference. And I'm trying to understand, for these utilities, these city-owned utilities, government-owned utilities that have been operating for years, what have they done differently than the investor-owned utilities? It seems like there's a big opportunity here for government entities to make various policy decisions, and I'm wondering if you might comment on what's with the dynamic here, given your comment that perhaps 2/3 of a typical bill is transmission. Thank you.
Sure. I'm familiar with that same article, and I'd never seen, up until that time, actually, it quantified what the differences are. But we've known for a long time that municipal utility districts do a better job of keeping prices down than do the investor-owned utilities. And I don't have a straightforward answer for you. The bill that you're seeing, which is encompassed in those numbers, incorporates both the transmission, distribution, and the generation together. So what we see is a lot of costs, which is why I have 142 people work on this kinds of issues, is to try to keep costs down in terms of programs that are implemented by the utilities that we think are too expensive and too much, and basically go in areas where they don't have to go. We think the utilities' function is to provide energy, and it should do so in a least cost way. Investor-owned utilities are corporations, and so their primary goal as a corporation is to satisfy return to shareholders. And they've been very successful at getting government approval on increasing costs. And as those curves diverge, you see much greater costs for the investor-owned utilities now today than you do for the publicly owned utilities. So I don't have one answer for you, but I can point to a lot of different programs where investor-owned utilities have been spending a lot more money unnecessarily. Our organization put out a report about 3-4 years ago, which we called the greenwash, which was basically that showed that the investor-owned utilities spent about $8 billion totally on renewable energy, which is necessary, but you don't have to overspend. That there had to be more discipline in terms of procurement. So we found that about $8 billion more was spent on procurement of energy by the investor-owned utilities than was necessary at the time.
And I'll take the first part of that question. As far as help with hiring, the first thing I'll say, and this is kind of a blanket offer to any local government out there who's looking to launch a program, we try to be helpful in providing tips. I think local governments are always good at not reinventing the wheel and swapping, ideas on, how do I help with this? How do I help with that? We tried to be really helpful, and I think we were with the launch of Sonoma Clean Power and Lancaster Choice Energy, just because we need more CCAs out there advocating at the CPUC and at the legislature. So it's in our interest to help you guys out, and we want to help out. Couple of quick tips. We learned that advertising on energyjobs.com is a great place. A lot of folks in the energy world go there when they're looking for jobs. We also have gotten a lot of folks through LinkedIn. But the type of folks that are attracted to come work for us are typically from the energy sector. They might have worked for CAISO. They might have worked for an incumbent utility, PG&E, Edison, et cetera. We do have a few employees that have worked for PG&E in the past or other energy sector companies. Developers, folks that have been in the solar development realm and are looking for more stability, will sometimes be attracted to our jobs, to working with us. We've been fortunate in attracting a lot of folks that are very early in their career, kind of junior level folks looking to help with some of our innovative pilots. Those are some ideas, but I'm happy to follow up if you have more questions. And also we have an HR person who could just send you the list of who we recruit with, and that would make it real easy.
And I'd also like to address your question about why the difference in rates between IOUs and municipal utilities. Since I work for Silicon Valley Power, the municipal utility serving the city of Santa Clara, and I think it's really key is what Joe talked about, ratepayers versus shareholders. For a municipal utility, your ratepayers and your shareholders are the same people. They're the residents of your community, and you're not trying to maximize the return to your shareholders. Whereas for an investor-owned utility, the ratepayers and shareholders are different, and oftentimes the employees in the company are also the shareholders, because like any private company, they like to have their employees own stock. So there's, I think that's a lot of it. Also, a municipal utility has a more similar geography. PG&E needs to serve people, in Northern California, the Central Valley, the coast. So it's a more difficult job to design programs that meet all of the different geographies that they serve, so it would be more expensive. But I mean, this is why CCAs are probably a great thing, because they're going to put pressure on the IOUs to keep those costs down. So we're looking forward to that competition. Other questions? If you want to just speak loudly, we'll. Okay.
Hi, I'm Paul Ledesma. I'm with the City of San Jose. I had a question about the future pricing of contracts for power, especially renewable power. Right now, it seems to be, my understanding is that it's a kind of a buyer's market. There's more capacity bidding on the contracts. And since we haven't yet taken a policy position in San Jose on this, and we're going to be coming after San Mateo County, Alameda County, San Francisco, our own neighboring cities in Santa Clara County. Do you have any expectation or any forecasts, any idea? Is renewable power capacity going to be able to keep up with demand? Or are we going to be looking a couple of years down the road at shorter supplies of renewables?
I can comment on that. Whenever we go out to bid, we get at least 10 times more supply bid to us than we can take. And they're quality bids, so we really get to pick the cream of the crop. But what I've seen consistently over 10 years is that there are developers out there really desperate for buyers, and there's a lot of them. And I think it's going to be a very long time before we start running out of space to put renewable energy in California. The IOUs are fully fully covered as far as the RPS goes right now. They're not buying right now. So we get calls throughout every week from new folks, trying to sell power to us. So I would not be concerned about the new CCAs using up the available supply. I don't think that's a concern. As far as pricing goes, we have looked at what pricing is going to look like if the ITC credits expire, kind of looking at the horizon of the expiration of those credits. And what we've seen, because we're actually looking to procure during that time frame, and so we've seen kind of the prices before, during, and after. And what we've seen is a bit of a rise right around the time that those are expected to expire that lasts for about 18 months, and then they dip back down again. So if we were buying long-term renewable supply going out beyond that ITC expiration, we wouldn't see a really big impact. So, things could change, but that's what we're seeing today.
The ITC is the investment tax credit is due to expire at the end of 2016, so developers are really trying to get buyers for their projects and they need to get their projects started before the end of 2016 to take advantage of that ITC.
So we were also, I just want to comment that we're going to a 50% renewable target in California. The governor's already signaled that that's what he wants, and I'm pretty sure that he's going to sign legislation pretty soon to make that a law. So we're going to see a very large moving landscape in terms of resources on the renewable side. Right now, we have system overgeneration in the afternoon in the ISO market that's already showing up, primarily because of solar occupying so much of the renewable market. We're going to have to spread that out to the margins, and we're going to have to figure out new technologies to do that, to either extend the solar day through storage, through some other technology to extend that. It's an open field, and I think that what we're going to see is that what you assume today is not going to be what you can assume 2 years from now. All you can assume is things are changing fast, but that we're going in the direction of a more microgrid society. So a lot of customer choice, like Dan had mentioned this morning, is going to be part of the calculus in the future. It's not going to be the old style, major corporation developing technology and then sort of shoving it down the pipe. It's going to be a lot of local change.
Got some patient hands over there. If you can speak really loudly. So question, did everyone hear that? Basically, the question is, what are the precautions you can take with regards to risks, and what's the best size for a CCA, which we covered a little earlier, but maybe a little more detail. I don't know who'd like to go into that.
Dawn, you're probably the best person to comment on that.
Yeah, no problem. I think that the best way to protect against risk is to build a very strong multidisciplinary team to get your program launched. We were really fortunate to have a very, very strong technical team and a strong legal team in our early formative years. And I think a good way to ensure that you have a strong team is to have a competitive bidding process, potentially, if you're able to, or if you're not able to, have a lot of transparency regarding what is being offered by your vendors, what has been their track record in the past, and if time allows, conducting peer reviews of their work and what they're proposing. That was important to us as the first CCA, and I think too much of that can slow the process down, and I hate doing things slowly, so I wouldn't necessarily advocate for that. But I do think that ensuring that you're not going down the wrong path is worth a little bit of time.
There is in the back there.
How are you seeing
The direction that we're seeing, at least at the state level, is that the utilities are being asked to make their grids available for more plug-and-play kind of technology at the distribution level. So you're still going to have, in most cases, a backup system where you'll be supplying power from maybe some solar plant in the desert, as one option. But you'll also have a lot of opportunities at the distribution level to put in storage, to put in other types of renewable resources, some behind the meter, some within the distribution grid. And the grid is going to be, I hate to use the word all the time, but smarter. It's going to be able to recognize changes in electrical flow and grid stability and adjust very quickly to perturbations in the grid. So it's not going to be like you have big blackouts all of a sudden, that you have the technology built into the system to accept all these different inputs and outputs at a very local level. So I think that's what I mean. The utilities are being asked to submit these distribution resource plans. And as a matter of fact, they're due soon to the Public Utilities Commission. That's going to be the first step in redesigning their system in order to be more attractive to customers to be able to interact in a very real way in terms of generation and storage.
May I add? Yes. I just want to say that many of the things we heard about this morning with the 4Ds, we see community choice as a game-changing innovation platform. The utilities, in many ways, and they're being pushed to change, are rigid. And community choice can be agile, and it can experiment with things at the local level that can't happen otherwise. And this is why one of the reasons that we think that can push the future in a way that we want to go. So that, and Silicon Valley, going back to the theme of this panel, that's why it's such a huge opportunity for Silicon Valley, because here's where innovation happens. Here is where there's venture capital. Here is where we can talk about intelligence and putting that into the systems here. So that's why I'm very excited that community choice is being considered throughout Silicon Valley right now.
So I've been given the sign that we need to stop because there's another session that's going to come in here at 11:30, but we could talk about this for hours more. Fortunately, we have an opportunity this afternoon to spend another hour talking about community choice energy in the Conversations for Action from 2:25 to 3:30. So I encourage you to do that if you're interested in a further discussion. But most of all, I would like to thank this tremendous panel that has come here this morning. It's been great. So thank you, Don, Joe, and Ann, for your time, and thank you, all of you, for coming to listen to and talk about this great opportunity for the future.